Hi everyone, I am Giulia Romano, postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of East Asian Studies of the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany, and I am assistant to the chair of Chinese politics of this same institute. What I'm presenting today with this video is a monograph which sums up the results of a long and intense project of research which I began in 2012 as a PhD student back to Sciences Po in Paris, and I concluded first in 2016 and then resumed in 2018 to follow up and collect any update in the story that is presented in this work. The title of the book is Changing Urban Renewal Policies in China, Policy Transfer and Policy Learning under Multiple Hierarchies. And the first thing that we can say about this book is that it clearly brings the focus of policy transfer studies to a country, which is China, which so far has been poorly explored by this literature. Some works focusing on transfers in different policy sectors to China have appeared in the very recent years, but we definitely need to understand better how foreign knowledge gets to inspire reforms in China, how this knowledge is acquired, and when it is accepted and adopted, how this is actually used and appropriated in China, how it is learned and how it is translated, and what kind of obstacles also this process of policy learning and knowledge utilization can find. And this is exactly what the book is about. So it's about exploring how foreign knowledge is transferred to China and how it gets used in the local reform process. So how it interacts with local policy making. In my study, I have focused in particular on the circulation of ideas, models, and knowledge in the sector of urban policy. And I was interested in particular in the possible translations of the broad concept of sustainable urban development or even eco-city development, observing how these concepts were interpreted in China. So what types of policies the government at the central and the local levels were implementing or designing, what type of initiatives they were taking, and who participated in them. What I observed is that in these various types of developments, it was possible to identify an important contribution of foreign knowledge, often coming from Europe, but not only. So we could find different types of initiatives aiming at knowledge transmission and circulation, sometimes promoted by national cooperation agencies in specific countries, sometimes by international organizations, sometimes by transnational city networks, city-to-city partnerships, and sometimes also by non-public actors, may these be international NGOs or multinational planning cabinets, Archistars, or smaller consultancy cabinets, sometimes in collaboration with foreign universities. So broadly speaking, notwithstanding the variety of approaches and collaboration partners, as well as collaboration topics, we can say that these various projects shared more or less all the same objective of transferring knowledge, competencies, recommendations, and or technology to the targeted cities. So observing these different developments, this study actually set to ask about what happens in these projects. Do they have any impact? Can they inspire a change in local policies? And in particular, following a classical question by Richard Rose, the study asked whether models and or approaches developed in a specific setting can be valid also in other very different contexts. So whether they have the capacity to inspire a change in local policies and paradigms, whether they are emulated in the scopes and contents, or whether they are incompatible with local practices, policy-making styles, and institutions. And this is something that we could expect actually to happen in a very distant context like China. To answer to these questions, I based myself principally on the analysis of a single case study, which is notably the case of the transfer of the concept of care for urban renewal to the Chinese city of Yanzhou. Although I am aware of the limits of such an approach, that such an approach can give in terms of generalization, especially for a vast and diverse country like China, I have chosen this case for a series of practical and also heuristic reasons. First of all, the case is very interesting because it was one of the few initiatives that at the time of the inquiry, it was already concluded. And in particular, when I began the inquiry in 2013, 6 years already passed since the conclusion of the project. So I think it provided really good conditions to explore some sort of policy learning impacts, which take some time to emerge and, so to speak, to become visible, as the literature has already evidenced. Second, the case was very interesting because Yanzhou was one of the cities selected by the central government to explore alternative paths of development. At least it was so on paper. So it allowed me actually to look at what these initiatives of the Chinese central government consist of, knowing that they are launched every time a new international buzzword appears. So there has been a time for sustainable urban development, there has been a time for eco-cities, there has been also time for low-carbon cities, and so on. Third, studying this case was also very interesting to discover something of these Chinese cities which are little explored by the Western literature in urban studies, which so far has been mostly attentive to developments happening in the large and very famous Chinese cities. The study, on the contrary, focuses on what we can call an ordinary city of China, surely with limited administrative capacities, with limited resources. Therefore, it can somehow be representative of other dozens of Chinese cities for these characteristics. Fourth point, and very important, the single case study was also the most practicable option to pursue a series of research objectives. The main contribution of this book is actually that to follow over time how foreign knowledge was used by the Yanzhou administration, and try to identify what was learned and what changed compared to the past. And in order to achieve these objectives, so to conduct this intensive longitudinal study, it was necessary to reconstruct the international cooperation projects, which took place between 2003 and 2007, and to reconstruct the situation ex ante the cooperation project, and then to understand what was done ex post this project. So to understand whether and how the local government had made use of the disparate ideas which had been proposed by the International Cooperation Agency, whether some new policies and administrative arrangements had been introduced in the time, whether new projects and experiments have been conducted, whether there had been a sort of relation with what had been experimented with international cooperation project, and then what was done later on. Of course, this longitudinal study required the use of very different research approaches, among which a reconstruction of the process based on fragmentary documents, consultation of official documents, and many, many interviews with the people in Yanzhou as well as elsewhere, especially the foreign agents. And this was not always evident or easily doable, especially in a context like China, recalling that an important component of this research was that of learning about the views and the understandings of the local policymakers in Yanzhou, in particular of the city administration. And this is not an easy to do inquiry. So already conducting a single case study of this type, making use of ethnographic approaches was a challenge, and that's why I opted for the single case study option. What came out of this challenging but also very fascinating reconstruction? I mean, it was a lot of passion for me. I really loved to conduct it. It's actually the story of a model of urban renewal which originated in West Berlin in the 1970s and 1980s, and which was itself the result of knowledge circulations that took place in Europe in the 60s and the 70s, and that traveled to Yanzhou in the form of studies, of policy recommendations, and pilot projects in the early 2000s. What we can see in the study is that initially the local administration was not very eager to change its approach to urban renewal, which, contrary to the German model, it was far less careful of the existing spaces, existing urban layout, and also existing uses of these spaces, and rather aiming at extreme makeovers of traditional urban spaces. But thanks then to important changes in the local administration, which led to administrative reordering, the ideas transferred with the German cooperation project had the chance to be taken out of the garbage can, find space in the local government agenda, and finally find application and translation into policies, plans, instruments, administrative arrangements, and urban renewal project. The study actually shows that foreign ideas have been able to inspire a reform, ambitious reforms of the policies of a single city. And it also shows that these ideas have been mixed with knowledge originating from elsewhere in China, as well as from what we can call the drawers of Yanzhou administration, because some ideas had already been developed in the past, but they never had been experimented or not so much experimented on the ground. So similarly to what policy transfer scholars focusing on other countries, and particularly Western countries, have been noticing, the local process of policy transfer and knowledge adaptation has been characterized by considerable hybridization, translation, which has also been fed by the local process of implementation of these different policies, seeing how these policies have been received by the recipients and then correcting them whenever this was possible. So broadly speaking, we could say that the transfer took place and persisted somehow, and that the case of Yanzhou configures in a way as a sort of textbook case because many of the findings of the studies resonate, so to speak, with what the policy transfer literature has written. So that transfer needed long time, it had multiple temporalities, it didn't take place immediately, and for sure not in a linear way. Many actors also participated in the process. Sometimes they were not the ones that we found at the very beginning of the process of transfer. We found also resistance to certain policies or novelties, and what came out finally out of this process is local adaptation of foreign ideas which have been mixed, as I said, with knowledge coming from elsewhere. The studies also evidence that there exist multiple challenges to the process of policy learning and knowledge utilization, and to the rooting of new ideas in local practices, possibly leading in the long term to a paradigm shift. This is actually, by the way, a theoretical concept that I have used in the study, drawing from Peter All, to describe at ease what careful urban renewal in a sense was. But as the study shows, it was not possible to talk about a real paradigm shift, as there do not exist the conditions for this to happen, and the Yanzhou administration cannot do that much about that. Because part of its capacity is actually to change the paradigm of urban renewal, and therefore to root what the administration has learned in the last decades in this policy field. Well, this does not depend on the political will of its leaders or of the local administration, but on important reforms that shall come from the central government and which up to now were missing or began to shyly appear. Moreover, the study has also underlined that the process of policy learning leading to a possible future paradigm shift, but the last word cannot be said for now, well, this process was affected by multiple hierarchies under which the administration working in Yanzhou is subjected. And these different hierarchies, or if you want, sources of power inside of the Chinese state, they actually at times opened opportunities for policy learning, and at other times they closed this. And for this reason, the study puts forward the concepts of windows for policy learning, precisely to characterize these ephemeral moments in which the local administration could experiment with new ideas, develop new policies based on the foreign recommendations. But then, as I said, these windows closed in this long-term process that I have analyzed. And all in all, basically, this different findings characterized the local process of policy learning and knowledge utilization as a bumpy process and very uncertain one. So the study, so to speak, allowed to explore the microdynamics of a process of policy transfer, as recently suggested by Magdalena Hadziski, Leslie Paul, and Christopher Walker, and allowed also to grasp some of the characteristics of these processes in a Chinese context. Namely, as this book contends, these microdynamics do not show specific features or characteristics able to support an idea of Chinese style of policy transfer or policy transfer with Chinese characteristics. Rather, actually, what it shows is that Western theorizations about policy learning and knowledge utilization based on studies conducted in Western administrations have been really precious to decipher and report what happened in Yenzhou. So while, of course, recognizing the presence of specificity in the policy process in China and some curiosities also about single items in the translation process, which can be attributed to various aspects of local cultures, this study actually also shows that what we have learned about policy transfers and learning in the West can be applied also to China, and that this country in turn can also contribute with interesting lessons to the development of policy transfer studies, especially when you want to understand something about the performance and persistence of transfers, as it has been suggested by Wade Jacoby. So if you want to discover something about the nitty and gritty of policy transfer, policy learning and knowledge utilization in a city administration, in this case speaking Chinese, and see also how the local state sees and understands foreign knowledge and makes use of it, well, I warmly recommend the reading of this book. So thank you very much for your attention, and I really hope we will have soon the chance to exchange in person, to meet all, and to learn about other research, other interesting, exciting research pieces and projects. Thank you. Ciao!